To the Gunslinger's Bride, Love and Betrayal Among the Apache. Chapter 1. The Outlaw's Shadow. The Arizona Territory stretched endlessly under a merciless sun, its red dust clinging to everything it touched. In the small frontier town of Copper Ridge, nestled between jagged mesas and sparse vegetation, life moved at the rhythm of survival. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their paint peeling under the relentless heat. Saloons, general stores, and a modest church composed the heart of a community where everyone knew everyone else's business, and secrets were currency. It was late afternoon when Jack Thornton rode into town. His horse, a scarred grey stallion, kicked up clouds of dust as it trotted down the center of the dirt road. Jack was a man whose reputation preceded him, a gunslinger with a dark past, wanted posters bearing his name scattered across 3 territories. His face was weathered, his eyes the color of storm clouds, and his right hand never strayed far from the Colt .45 strapped to his hip. He wasn't looking for trouble, at least not the kind that involved bullets. Jack had come to Copper Ridge for one reason: to disappear. After years of running from lawmen, rival outlaws, and ghosts of his own making, he'd decided it was time to vanish into the anonymity of the desert. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. As he dismounted in front of the saloon, Jack's attention was drawn to a commotion near the edge of town. A young woman stood her ground against 3 rowdy cowhands, her voice sharp and unafraid despite being outnumbered. She had long black hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, bronze skin that gleamed in the sunlight, and eyes that burned with defiance. Her clothing, a mix of traditional Apache patterns and practical frontier wear, marked her as someone caught between 2 worlds. "I said no," she repeated, her tone cutting through the men's drunken laughter. "Now move along before you regret it." One of the cowhands, a burly man with a crooked nose, stepped closer. "Come on, Aita. We're just having a little fun. No need to get all high and mighty." Jack watched from a distance, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. He'd seen this scenario play out too many times. Men underestimating a woman, pushing boundaries until violence became inevitable. And while he'd promised himself he was done with fighting, some things couldn't be ignored. Before he could intervene, Aita moved. In one fluid motion, she produced a knife from her belt and pressed it against the cowhand's throat. Her movements were precise, practiced, a warrior's grace born from necessity. "I won't ask again," she said, her voice steady. The other 2 cowhands backed away, hands raised in mock surrender. The man with the knife at his throat swallowed hard, nodding slowly. Aita released him with a shove, and the 3 men stumbled off, muttering curses under their breath. Jack found himself smiling, a rare expression for a man like him. There was something about her that reminded him of why he'd once believed in justice, before the world had beaten that belief out of him. As Aita turned to leave, her eyes met Jack's. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, 2 strangers recognizing something familiar in the other's gaze. Then she nodded once, a silent acknowledgement, and walked away. Jack tied his horse to the hitching post and stepped into the saloon. The interior was dim, the air thick with cigar smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. A few locals glanced his way, their expressions wary. Word traveled fast in towns like this, and Jack's face was memorable enough to trigger suspicion. He ordered a drink and took a seat in the corner, his back to the wall. Old habits died hard. As he sipped his whiskey, Jack tried to convince himself that he could settle here, that he could bury his past and build something resembling a normal life. But even as he thought it, he knew it was a lie. Men like him didn't get second chances. They only got postponements. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and crimson, Jack found himself wandering the outskirts of town. He told himself he was just exploring, getting a feel for the place, but deep down he knew he was looking for her. He found Aita near the river, sitting on a flat rock with her knees drawn to her chest. The sound of running water filled the silence, and for a moment Jack considered turning back, but something, curiosity, loneliness, or maybe just the pull of fate, kept him rooted in place. "You handle yourself well," he said, his voice breaking the quiet. Aita didn't startle. She'd heard him approach, her senses too sharp to miss the sound of boots on gravel. She turned her head slightly, studying him with those dark, penetrating eyes. "And you watch from the shadows," she replied. "That makes you either a coward or someone who's seen too much blood." Jack let out a low chuckle. Maybe both. He moved closer, stopping a respectful distance away. Aita gestured to the rock beside her, and after a moment's hesitation, Jack sat down. "I'm Jack," he said. "Aita," she replied, though you probably already knew that. They sat in silence for a while, the river's gentle murmur filling the space between them. There was an ease to the quiet. Neither of them felt the need to fill it with meaningless conversation. "Why did you help me earlier?" Aita finally asked. Jack shrugged. "I didn't. You handled it yourself. But you were ready to." He didn't deny it. "I've seen enough men like that to know where things were headed. Figured I'd step in if needed." Aita studied him, her gaze searching for something beneath the surface. "You're not from here." "Neither are you," Jack countered. A faint smile tugged at her lips. "No, I'm not." She told him, in brief fragments, about her life. She was Apache, raised by her people in the mountains until the army forced them onto reservations. She'd escaped years ago, refusing to live under the government's thumb, and had been moving from place to place ever since. Copper Ridge was just another temporary stop, a place to rest before moving on. Jack listened without interrupting, recognizing the pain in her story. It was different from his, but the core was the same: survival, loss, and the constant search for something resembling freedom. When she finished, Aita looked at him expectantly. "Your turn." Jack hesitated. He wasn't used to sharing, and the idea of laying his past bare to a stranger felt dangerous. But there was something about Aita, a strength, a resilience that made him want to trust her. "I've done things," he began slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Things I'm not proud of. I was a kid when the war ended, too young to fight, but old enough to see what it did to people. After that, I drifted, took jobs where I could find them, some legal, most not. Eventually, I ended up working for men who didn't care about right or wrong, only profit. By the time I realized what I'd become, it was too late." Aita's expression didn't change, but Jack could see understanding in her eyes. "And now?" "Now I'm trying to leave it behind," he said. "Not sure if that's possible, but I'm here, so I guess I'll find out." They sat together until the stars emerged, scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. When Aita finally stood to leave, Jack walked with her back toward town. They parted ways at the edge of the settlement, exchanging no promises or plans to meet again. But as Jack returned to the small room he'd rented above the saloon, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just shifted in a direction he hadn't anticipated. Over the following weeks, Jack and Aita crossed paths often. At first it was coincidental, shared glances in the market, brief conversations at the river. But gradually, those encounters became intentional. Jack found himself seeking her out, drawn by a connection he couldn't quite explain. Aita, for her part, was equally intrigued. She'd learned to be wary of outsiders, especially men like Jack, dangerous, unpredictable. But beneath his hardened exterior, she glimpsed something softer, a man who'd been broken by the world but hadn't entirely surrendered to it. One evening, as they sat together on the riverbank, Jack reached out and gently took Aita's hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers through his, and for the first time in years, Jack felt something he thought he'd lost forever: hope. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because stories like this one don't just entertain, they remind us what it means to fight for love, survival, and redemption. Hit that button so you never miss a chapter. Risinjuena, Chapter 2, Whispers of the Past. The days in Copper Ridge stretched into weeks, and with each passing sunrise, Jack and Aita grew closer. Their bond was built on shared silences, unspoken understanding, and the gradual lowering of walls they'd both spent years constructing. For Jack, it was a revelation. He'd never imagined he could feel this way, let alone deserve someone like Aita. But the past, as Jack had learned long ago, was never truly buried. It waited in the shadows, patient and relentless, until the moment it could strike. One morning, Jack woke to the sound of horses thundering into town. From his window, he watched as a group of men dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. They were heavily armed, their faces grim and purposeful. Jack's stomach tightened. He recognized the type: bounty hunters or hired guns, men who made their living tracking people like him. He dressed quickly and slipped out the back, avoiding the main street. Aita had mentioned she'd be at the general store that morning, and Jack needed to warn her. If these men were here for him, being associated with Jack could put her in danger. He found her outside the store examining a bolt of fabric. The moment she saw his face, she knew something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, her hand instinctively moving to the knife at her belt. "Trouble," Jack said tersely. "Men just rode into town, could be nothing, but I don't want to take chances." Aita's expression hardened. "You think they're here for you?" "Maybe. I don't know yet." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then we should find out." Together they moved through the narrow alleyways, keeping out of sight as they approached the sheriff's office. Through the window, Jack could see the men inside, talking to Sheriff Caldwell, a portly man in his 50s who preferred keeping the peace to enforcing the law. Jack strained to hear their conversation, catching fragments through the open window. Wanted in 3 territories. Rewards substantial. Seen him around here?" Jack's jaw clenched. They were here for him, all right. The question now was whether anyone in town would give him up. Aita touched his arm, pulling him back. "We need to leave," she whispered urgently. "Not yet," Jack replied. "I need to know if they have anything solid." Before she could argue, one of the bounty hunters stepped outside. He was tall, with a scar running down the left side of his face and cold, calculating eyes. Jack recognized him instantly. Cole Masterson, a man he'd crossed paths with years ago during a botched robbery. Cole had sworn revenge after Jack had left him for dead in a burning building. Apparently he'd survived. "Damn," Jack muttered under his breath. "You know him?" Aita asked. "Unfortunately." Cole scanned the street, his gaze sweeping over the buildings like a predator searching for prey. For a heart-stopping moment, his eyes landed on the alley where Jack and Aita were hiding. Jack held his breath, his hand moving to his gun, but Cole's attention shifted, and he turned back toward the sheriff's office. Jack exhaled slowly. "We need to go. Now," he said. They retreated deeper into the alley, eventually making their way to Aita's small cabin on the outskirts of town. It was a simple structure, built with her own hands from salvaged wood and adobe. Inside, the space was sparse but functional. A bed, a table, shelves lined with dried herbs and preserved food. Aita lit a lantern and sat down across from Jack. "Tell me everything," she said. Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustration and exhaustion etched into his features. "Cole Masterson. We worked together once, years ago. The job went bad, building caught fire, people died, I got out, he didn't. At least I thought he didn't. And now he's here for revenge." "Revenge and money," Jack corrected. "There's a bounty on my head, enough to make him forget whatever grudge he's carrying." Aita leaned forward, her expression fierce. "Then we fight." Jack shook his head. "No, you're not getting mixed up in this." "I'm already mixed up in it," she shot back. "Or did you forget that we've been seen together? If they connect us, they'll use me to get to you." Jack opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. She was right. By letting himself get close to her, he'd already put her in danger. "I should leave," he said quietly. "It's the only way to keep you safe." Aita's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare run away and pretend it's for my sake. It is for your sake." "No, it's not," she said, her voice rising. "It's because you're scared. Scared of fighting, scared of losing, scared of letting someone care about you." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Jack looked away, unable to meet her gaze. After a long silence, Aita spoke again, her tone softer. "I'm not asking you to stay because I need protecting. I'm asking you to stay because I choose you. But if you don't choose me back, then go. Leave. But don't insult me by saying it's for my own good." Jack's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct told him to walk away, to disappear into the desert, and let Aita live her life without the shadow of his past hanging over her. But another part of him, the part that had started to believe in second chances, wanted to stay. "I don't want to lose you," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Aita reached across the table and took his hand. "Then don't." They spent the rest of the night planning. If Jack was going to stay, they needed a strategy. Running wasn't an option, not with Cole and his men already in town. That left two choices, hide or confront. Jack preferred the latter. He'd spent too many years running. If this was where he made his stand, so be it. But Aita had a different idea. "There's a place," she said, "up in the mountains. My people used it as a refuge during the wars. It's hidden, defensible. If we can get there, we'll have the advantage." Jack considered it. "How far?" "Half a day's ride. But we'd need supplies and we'd have to leave before dawn. Then that's what we'll do." As the first light of morning crept over the horizon, Jack and Aita prepared to leave. They moved quietly, gathering food, water, ammunition, and blankets. Every sound seemed amplified in the pre-dawn stillness, and Jack's nerves were on edge. Just as they were about to mount their horses, a voice called out from the darkness. "Going somewhere, Jack." Jack spun around, his gun drawn. Cole Masterson stepped into the light, flanked by two other men, his scarred face twisted into a grin. "Thought you could slip away, did you?" Cole said. "Not this time." Jack's mind raced. He was outnumbered, outgunned, but he wasn't about to let Aita become collateral damage. "This is between you and me, Cole," Jack said evenly. "Let her go." Cole's grin widened. "Oh, I don't think so. See, she's leverage, and leverage is valuable." Aita's hand moved toward her knife, but Jack subtly shook his head. Not yet. They needed an opening. Cole took a step closer. "Here's how this is going to work. You're coming with us, Jack, quietly. And if you cooperate, maybe, just maybe, your little Apache friend gets to walk away." Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. He could take Cole down, but the other two would gun him down before he got a second shot, and Aita would be caught in the crossfire. But before he could make a decision, a shot rang out. One of Cole's men dropped, clutching his shoulder. Chaos erupted as more gunfire echoed through the morning air. Jack didn't hesitate. He dove behind cover, pulling Aita with him. Bullets whizzed overhead as they scrambled toward their horses. "Who's shooting?" Aita shouted over the noise. "I don't know, and I don't care," Jack yelled back. "Move!" They reached the horses and mounted quickly. Jack fired off a few rounds to cover their escape, then spurred his horse forward. Aita followed close behind, and together they galloped into the desert, leaving Copper Ridge and Cole Masterson behind. As the town faded into the distance, Jack glanced back one last time. He didn't know who had intervened or why, but he owed them his life. And Aita's. For now, though, survival was all that mattered. The mountains awaited, and with them the promise of safety, or at least a fighting chance. Chapter 3. Sanctuary in the Stone. The ride to the mountains was grueling. The Arizona sun bore down on them mercilessly, turning the desert into a shimmering sea of heat and dust. Jack and Aita pushed their horses hard, knowing that Cole and his men wouldn't be far behind. Every ridge, every canyon could hide an ambush, and the weight of that knowledge kept them both on edge. By midday, they reached the foothills. The landscape shifted from flat desert to rocky terrain, dotted with scrub brush and twisted juniper trees. Aita led the way, her knowledge of the land guiding them through narrow passes and hidden trails that would be nearly impossible to track. They didn't speak much during the journey. Words felt unnecessary. Each understood the gravity of their situation. But occasionally Jack would glance over at Aita, taking in the determined set of her jaw, the way her eyes scanned the horizon with practiced vigilance. She was extraordinary, and with each passing hour, he became more certain that she was worth fighting for. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the rocks, Aita finally brought them to a halt. "We're close," she said, her voice hoarse from the dust and heat. They dismounted and led their horses up a steep incline. Jack's legs burned with effort, his lungs straining in the thin mountain air, but he didn't complain. If Aita could do this, so could he. At the top of the ridge, Aita pointed toward a narrow cleft in the rock face. There, she said. That's the entrance. Jack squinted, barely making out the opening. It was well concealed, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. How did your people find this place? They didn't find it, Aita replied. They made it, or rather, they adapted it. This canyon has been here for centuries, shaped by wind and water. My ancestors recognized its value and turned it into a fortress. They guided their horses through the cleft, which opened into a wide canyon. Steep walls rose on either side, creating a natural barrier that would be nearly impossible to breach. At the far end, Jack could see the remnants of old structures, stone shelters built into the canyon walls, their architecture blending seamlessly with the surrounding rock. This is incredible, Jack murmured. Aita smiled faintly. My people survived for generations using places like this. When the soldiers came, we held out here for months before they finally forced us out. There was sadness in her voice, and Jack didn't press further. Instead, he helped her unsaddle the horses and set up camp in one of the shelters. The space was small but defensible, with a narrow entrance that could be easily guarded. As night fell, they built a small fire. The flames cast flickering shadows on the canyon walls, and for the first time since leaving Copper Ridge, Jack allowed himself to relax, if only slightly. Aita sat beside him, her knees drawn up to her chest. Do you think they'll find us? She asked. Eventually, Jack admitted. Cole's persistent and he's got men who know how to track. But this place gives us time, and time is what we need. Time for what? Jack poked at the fire with a stick, watching the embers glow. To figure out our next move. We can't hide here forever. And what is our next move? Aita asked, her gaze steady. Jack hesitated. The truth was, he didn't have a plan beyond survival. He'd spent so many years running that he'd never learned how to fight back, not in a way that didn't end with more blood on his hands. I don't know, he said finally. But whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. Aita reached over and took his hand. Together, she echoed. They sat in silence, the fire crackling softly between them. For a moment, the world outside the canyon ceased to exist. There was only the two of them, bound by circumstance and something deeper, something neither of them was ready to name, but both felt undeniably. The next morning, Jack woke to the sound of Aita sharpening her knife. She sat cross-legged near the fire, her movements precise and methodical. He watched her for a moment, admiring the focus in her expression. How long have you been awake? He asked, sitting up. A while, Aita replied without looking up. I wanted to make sure we were alone. And? We're alone. For now. Jack stretched, his muscles stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. We should scout the area. Make sure there's no way in except the way we came. Aita nodded. Agreed. But first, we need to talk. Jack raised an eyebrow. About what? She set down her knife and turned to face him. About what happens if Cole finds us. Jack's jaw tightened. We fight, and if we can't win, then we die trying. Aita's expression softened. Jack, I'm not afraid of dying, but I'm not ready to give up either. If we're going to do this, if we're going to fight, we need to be smart about it. What are you suggesting? We need help, Aita said. My people, those who are still free, they're scattered, but they're out there. If we can reach them, they might be willing to help. Jack frowned. You think they'd risk their lives for me? A white man with a bounty on his head? No, Aita said bluntly. They'd risk their lives for me. And if I tell them you're worth saving, they'll listen. Jack stared at her, stunned by her faith in him. Why would you do that? Aita's gaze was unwavering. Because you're not the man you used to be. I see that. Even if you don't. Her words stirred something deep within Jack. A flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than his past. All right, he said, let's find your people. They spent the day preparing. Aita drew a map in the dirt, marking the locations where she believed her people might be hiding. Most were in the deeper mountains, far from the reach of soldiers and settlers. It would be a dangerous journey, but it was their best chance. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Aita told Jack more about her life before Copper Ridge. She spoke of her childhood, of running through the mountains with her siblings, of learning to hunt and fight from her father. She described the ceremonies, the songs, the stories passed down through generations, a rich tapestry of culture and tradition that the government had tried to erase. Jack listened intently, feeling both humbled and enraged by what she'd endured. "How do you keep going?" he asked. "After everything they've taken from you?" Aita looked into the flames. "Because if I stop, they win, and I refuse to let them win." Her resilience was staggering, and Jack found himself wishing he possessed even a fraction of her strength. As the fire burned low, Aita leaned against Jack's shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. They didn't speak, there was no need. In that moment, they were simply two people finding solace in each other's presence. But peace, as always, was fleeting. The next morning, as they prepared to leave, Jack heard a sound, a faint echo of hooves on stone. His blood ran cold. "They're here," he said, grabbing his rifle. Aita was already moving, extinguishing the fire and gathering their supplies. "How many?" Jack peered through the canyon entrance, his heart sinking. "Too many." At the mouth of the canyon, Cole Masterson sat astride his horse, flanked by at least a dozen men. He grinned when he saw Jack, his scarred face twisted with triumph. "End of the line, Jack," Cole shouted. "You've got nowhere left to run." Jack raised his rifle, taking aim. "Neither do you, Cole." But before he could pull the trigger, Aita grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered urgently. Jack looked at her, confused. "What are you—" "Trust me," she said. And then, from the canyon walls above, figures emerged. Apache warriors, armed with rifles and bows, positioned along the ridges. They'd been there the entire time, watching, waiting. Cole's grin faltered. His men shifted nervously, their eyes darting toward the cliffs. One of the warriors, a man with graying hair and a face marked by years of hardship, stepped forward. He spoke in Apache, his voice carrying across the canyon. Aita responded, her tone respectful but firm. Jack didn't understand the words, but he understood the intent. This was a negotiation, and Aita was in control. After a tense exchange, the warrior nodded. He raised his hand, and the other warriors lowered their weapons slightly. Aita turned to Cole. "You have a choice," she said, her voice steady. "Leave now, and you walk away alive. Stay, and you die here." Cole's face flushed with anger. "You think a handful of savages scares me?" The warrior spoke again, and this time his words needed no translation. He raised his rifle, aiming directly at Cole. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Cole turned his horse around. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yes, it is," Jack said quietly. Cole and his men retreated, their horses kicking up dust as they disappeared into the desert. Jack watched until they were out of sight, then turned to Aita. "How did you—" "I sent word last night," she said, "while you were sleeping. I knew they'd come." Jack shook his head in amazement. "You're incredible." Aita smiled. "I know." The warrior approached them, and Aita introduced him as Nietzsche, her uncle. He spoke briefly to Jack in broken English, his tone gruff but not unkind. "You are welcome here," he said, "but only because she says so." Jack nodded, gratitude swelling in his chest. "Thank you." Nietzsche grunted and walked away, leaving Jack and Aita alone. "What now?" Jack asked. Aita looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Now we live." If you're feeling this story, drop a comment saying, "This is what real love looks like." Let me know you're here watching, feeling every moment with them. Chapter 4. The Weight of Choice. The days following Cole's retreat were deceptively peaceful. Jack and Aita remained in the canyon, surrounded by Nietzsche and his people. The Apache were cautious around Jack at first, understandably so. He was an outsider, a white man with blood on his hands, but Aita vouched for him, and gradually the warriors began to accept his presence, if not entirely trust him. Jack spent his time learning. He watched the Apache move through the mountains with an ease that came from generations of living in harmony with the land. They showed him how to track, how to read the weather, how to find water in places where none seemed to exist. It was humbling, and for the first time in his life, Jack felt like he was part of something larger than himself. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Cole Masterson had retreated, but Jack knew him well enough to understand that he wouldn't give up. Men like Cole didn't walk away from vengeance or money. They regrouped, planned, and struck when you least expected it. Aita sensed Jack's unease. One evening, as they sat together on a ridge overlooking the canyon, she asked, "What's on your mind?" Jack gazed out at the darkening sky. "Cole, he's not done with us." "I know," Aita said, "but worrying won't change anything." "I'm not worried," Jack replied. "I'm preparing." Aita turned to face him. "For what?" "For the day he comes back, because he will. And when he does, I need to be ready." Aita studied him for a long moment. "You're talking about leaving." Jack didn't answer immediately. The truth was he'd been wrestling with that exact question. Staying here put Aita and her people in danger. But leaving felt like abandonment, like running away from the one good thing he'd found in his miserable life. "I don't want to," he said finally. "But if staying means putting you at risk, then stay and fight," Aita interrupted. "Stop running, Jack. You've been running your entire life. It's time to stand your ground." "I don't know if I can win," Jack admitted, his voice raw. "Maybe not," Aita said, "but at least you'll have tried. And you won't be alone." Jack looked at her, seeing the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had drawn him to her from the beginning. She was right. Running hadn't solved anything. It had only prolonged the inevitable. "All right," he said, "I'll stay." Aita smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. "Good." Over the following weeks, Jack and Naiche developed an uneasy alliance. Naiche made it clear that he didn't entirely approve of Aita's relationship with Jack, but he respected her choices. And as Jack proved his willingness to learn and contribute, Naiche's attitude softened, though only slightly. One afternoon, Naiche approached Jack while he was practicing his aim with a rifle. "You shoot well," Naiche said, watching Jack hit a target 50 yards away. "Had plenty of practice," Jack replied, reloading. Naiche nodded. "Aita tells me you were a gunslinger." "I was a lot of things," Jack said, "most of them bad." "And now?" Jack lowered the rifle, meeting Naiche's gaze. "Now I'm trying to be better." Naiche considered this. "It is not easy to change. The past does not let go willingly." "No," Jack agreed, "it doesn't." Naiche was silent for a moment, then spoke again. "Aita is strong, stronger than most, but strength does not mean she does not need protection." "I know," Jack said, "and I'll protect her, with my life if necessary." Naiche's expression remained unreadable. "Good, because if you fail, I will kill you myself." Jack didn't doubt him for a second. Despite the threats hanging over them, Jack and Aita found moments of happiness. They would ride together through the mountains, exploring hidden valleys and ancient ruins. Aita taught him about the plants and animals native to the region, sharing knowledge passed down through her people. Jack, in turn, shared stories of his travels, carefully edited to omit the worst parts. One night, under a sky filled with stars, Jack and Aita lay side by side on a blanket spread across the canyon floor. The fire had burned down to embers, and the only sounds were the distant calls of coyotes and the rustle of wind through the rocks. "Do you ever think about the future?" Aita asked, her voice soft. "Not really," Jack admitted. "I've never had much of one to think about. And now," Jack turned his head to look at her, "now I think maybe I do." Aita smiled. "What does it look like?" Jack hesitated, unsure how to put his thoughts into words. "I don't know. Quiet, maybe. Peaceful. Somewhere we don't have to keep looking over our shoulders." "That sounds nice," Aita said, "but unrealistic." Jack chuckled. "Yeah, probably." They lapsed into silence, and Jack found himself marveling at how much his life had changed in such a short time. A few months ago he'd been a drifter with no purpose and no hope. Now he had something, someone worth fighting for. "Aita," he said, his voice serious. "Yes?" "I love you." The words came out before he could stop them, and for a moment Jack regretted saying them. It felt too vulnerable, too exposed. But then Aita reached over and took his hand. "I love you too," she said simply. Relief flooded through Jack. He pulled her close, and they lay together beneath the stars, the world fading away until there was nothing but the two of them. But the peace couldn't last. It never did. A week later, one of Nietzsche's scouts returned with troubling news. Cole Masterson had been seen in a nearby town, gathering more men. He was planning something big, an assault most likely. Nietzsche called a council, and Jack was invited to attend. The warriors sat in a circle, their faces grim as they discussed the situation. Nietzsche spoke in Apache, his tone measured but urgent. Aita translated for Jack, her expression tense. "They're coming," she said. "Cole has at least 20 men now, maybe more. Nietzsche wants to know if we should flee or fight." Jack looked around the circle. These men had survived countless battles, countless losses. They knew the cost of war better than anyone. "What do you think?" he asked Aita. "I think running is no longer an option," she said. "Cole will hunt us wherever we go. If we're going to end this, we need to do it here." Nietzsche spoke again, and Aita nodded. "He agrees, but he wants to know if you're willing to fight alongside us." Jack didn't hesitate. "I am." Nietzsche studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we prepare." The next few days were a flurry of activity. The warriors fortified the canyon, setting traps and positioning themselves strategically along the ridges. Jack worked alongside them, his respect for their ingenuity growing with each passing hour. Aita was everywhere, organizing supplies, tending to the wounded from a previous skirmish, rallying the warriors with her fierce determination. Jack watched her in awe, realizing that she was not just strong, she was a leader. On the eve of the expected attack, Jack found Aita standing at the edge of the canyon, staring out into the darkness. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, joining her. "No," she said. "Too much on my mind." Jack wrapped his arms around her from behind, holding her close. "We'll get through this. And if we don't, then at least we'll go down fighting." Aita turned in his arms, her eyes searching his face. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, you won't regret this. Us." Jack cupped her face in his hands. "I could never regret you, Aita. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." She kissed him then, fiercely and desperately, as if trying to pour all her love and fear into that single moment. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Aita said, "know that I love you." "I love you too," Jack whispered. They stood together in the darkness, holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead. Neither spoke of the battle to come, of the odds stacked against them. For now, this moment was enough. But dawn was coming, and with it, Cole Masterson. Chapter 5. The Siege at Dawn. The first rays of sunlight crept over the canyon's edge, painting the rocks in shades of gold and crimson. Jack stood at the mouth of the canyon, rifle in hand, watching the horizon. Beside him, Aita checked her weapons, a knife, a revolver, and a bow she'd fashioned herself. "They'll come soon," she said, her voice steady. Jack nodded. "I know." Behind them, the warriors were in position. Nietzsche had chosen the battlefield wisely. The narrow canyon entrance created a choke point that would force Cole's men to attack in waves. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best chance they had. As the sun climbed higher, Jack spotted movement in the distance. Dust rose from the desert floor, kicked up by horses, lots of them. "Here they come," he said. Aita raised her hand, signaling to the warriors, everyone tensed, waiting. Cole Masterson rode at the head of his group, his scarred face twisted into a sneer. He pulled his horse to a stop just outside rifle range and dismounted. His men followed suit, spreading out in a semicircle. "Jack Thornton!" Cole shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Last chance, come out now and I'll make it quick." Jack stepped forward, his rifle leveled at Cole. "You want me? Come and get me." Cole laughed. "Have it your way." He raised his hand and his men charged. Gunfire erupted as the first wave of attackers rushed the canyon entrance. Jack fired, his bullet finding its mark and dropping a man before he could get close. Ayita loosed an arrow, striking another through the chest. The warriors on the ridges opened fire, their shots precise and devastating. Bodies fell as Cole's men struggled to advance through the narrow passage, but they kept coming, driven by greed and loyalty to their leader. Jack fought with a desperation he'd never felt before. Every shot was for Ayita, for Nietzsche, for the people who had given him a second chance. He reloaded and fired, until his ears rang and his hands shook, but Cole's men were relentless. They pushed forward, using fallen comrades as cover. One managed to break through, lunging at Jack with a knife. Jack sidestepped and slammed the butt of his rifle into the man's temple, dropping him instantly. Ayita fought beside him, her movements fluid and lethal. She was a force of nature, cutting down anyone who got too close, but even she couldn't be everywhere at once. A scream echoed from the ridge above. One of the warriors had been hit. Jack's heart sank. They were losing ground. "Fall back!" Nietzsche shouted in Apache. The warriors retreated deeper into the canyon, regrouping behind a makeshift barricade of rocks and logs. Cole's men pressed their advantage, advancing into the canyon. Jack and Ayita joined the warriors, firing from cover. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder. "This isn't working," Jack shouted over the noise. "We need a new plan!" Nietzsche barked orders, and two warriors disappeared into one of the side passages. Jack didn't know what they were planning, but he trusted Nietzsche to have a strategy. Minutes later, a massive rumble shook the canyon. Rocks began to fall from the cliffs above, crashing down on Cole's men. The warriors had triggered a rock slide, burying several attackers and blocking the entrance. Cole's men faltered, confusion spreading through their ranks. Jack seized the opportunity. "Now!" he yelled. The defenders surged forward, catching the attackers off guard. Hand-to-hand combat erupted as the two sides clashed. Jack fought with everything he had, his fists and rifle becoming extensions of his will to survive. He saw Ayita grappling with one of Cole's men, her knife flashing in the sunlight. Jack dispatched his own opponent and rushed to her aid, but she didn't need it. With a swift motion, she drove her blade into the man's side and he collapsed. "Thanks," she panted. "Any time," Jack replied. But the battle was far from over. Cole himself had entered the fray, his eyes locked on Jack. He pushed through the chaos, determination etched into every line of his face. "This ends now, Jack!" Cole roared, drawing his pistol. Jack met him head-on. They fired simultaneously, but both shots went wide. They collided, grappling for control of each other's weapons. "You should have stayed dead," Cole snarled, his grip like iron. "You should have let me go," Jack shot back. They struggled, each trying to gain the upper hand. Jack's muscles screamed in protest, but he refused to give in. He thought of Ayita, of the life they could have if he could just survive this moment. With a sudden burst of strength, Jack twisted Cole's arm, forcing him to drop his gun. He followed up with a punch to the jaw, sending Cole staggering backward, but Cole recovered quickly, pulling a knife from his belt. He lunged at Jack, the blade slicing through the air. Jack barely dodged, feeling the sting as it grazed his arm. They circled each other, both breathing hard. Around them, the battle raged on, but in that moment, the only thing that mattered was the confrontation between the two of them. Cole attacked again, and Jack blocked, grabbing his wrist. They grappled, each trying to overpower the other. Jack's vision narrowed, his focus entirely on the man who had hunted him for so long. And then, in a split second, Jack saw his opening. He drove his knee into Cole's stomach, doubling him over. Before Cole could recover, Jack wrenched the knife from his hand and plunged it into his chest. Cole gasped, his eyes wide with shock. He staggered backward, clutching the wound. You bastard," he choked out. Jack watched as Cole collapsed, the life draining from his eyes. There was no satisfaction in it, only exhaustion and relief that it was finally over. The remaining attackers, seeing their leader fall, began to retreat. Nietzsche's warriors pursued them briefly, ensuring they wouldn't regroup and return. Jack dropped to his knees, his body trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion. Ayita rushed to his side, wrapping her arms around him. "It's over," she whispered. "It's over." Jack held her tightly, unable to speak. The weight of everything he'd done, everything he'd lost, came crashing down on him. But through it all, one thing remained clear. He had survived. They had survived. And for now, that was enough. Doistia Chapter 6, A New Dawn. The aftermath of the battle was a blur. The canyon was littered with bodies, both friend and foe. Naiche's warriors moved through the carnage, tending to the wounded and honoring the dead. Jack helped where he could, but his mind was elsewhere. On Ayita, on the future, on what came next. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Naiche called another council. This time the mood was somber. They had won, but the cost had been high. Several warriors had fallen and others were gravely injured. Naiche spoke in Apache, his voice heavy with grief. Ayita translated for Jack. He says we fought well, that the spirits will honor those who died defending their home, but he also says this cannot continue. We cannot keep fighting forever. Jack looked around the circle, seeing the weariness in the warriors' faces. They had given everything, and they had nothing left to give. What does he want to do? Jack asked. Ayita listened as Naiche continued. He says it's time to move, to find a new place far from here where we can live in peace. Jack nodded. It made sense. Staying here would only invite more trouble. And us? He asked quietly. What about us? Ayita met his gaze, her expression unreadable. He says that's our choice to make. Jack's heart pounded. This was it. The moment where they decided their future. Stay with the Apache or strike out on their own. Either way, it would change everything. That night, Jack and Ayita sat together by the fire away from the others. The silence between them was comfortable, but beneath it, Jack could feel the weight of unspoken questions. What do you want to do? He asked finally. Ayita stared into the flames. I want to be with you, but I also want to be with my people, and I don't know if I can have both. Jack took her hand. Then we'll figure it out, together. Ayita looked at him, tears glistening in her eyes. You'd give up everything for me. I already have, Jack said softly, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. She leaned into him, and they sat in silence, watching the fire burn low. The next morning, Jack and Ayita made their decision. They would stay with the Apache for now, but they also knew that eventually they would need to find their own path. Naiche accepted their choice without comment, and the preparations to move began. The canyon was abandoned, its secrets left to the wind and the stones. As they rode away, Jack looked back one last time. The canyon had been a sanctuary, a battleground, and a home. Leaving it felt like closing a chapter of his life, one filled with pain, but also with love and redemption. Ayita rode beside him, her hand brushing against his. Where do we go from here? She asked. Jack smiled. Wherever we want. And for the first time in his life, Jack Thornton truly believed it. If you watched this far, it's because you liked this case. Leave a comment saying, I watched this far, so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories on this channel. And if this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who loves tales of love, courage, and redemption. Your support keeps these stories alive.